Hi, I'm Grayson Daub, and I'll be your UX instructor today. We are now in Lesson 2. Please feel free to go back and check out Lesson 1 before getting started here. We'll be going over 5 practical guides for UX and UI, which are all very different, and we're going to be talking about the main differences between these two fields as they often get confused. They do tend to intertwine. As a UX designer, it doesn't always mean you'll be doing UI though, and vice versa. Before we get there, we're going to be talking about the 5 UX practical guides, being mastering the basics of visual and web design, understanding the UX design process, learn how to design user interfaces and sharpen your visual design skills, work on fake/training projects, learn UI, UX related tools. So before we jump into UX UI design, we need to master these basics of web and visual design beforehand with all of these principles and skills that'll be carried over in UI design, such as designing buttons, typography, white space, drop shadow, working with different color combinations, gradients, anything a little bit more visually. So having a good understanding and solid foundation in visual and web design is essential to becoming a skilled UX UI designer. We're going to be talking about the basic and key design principles that you need to become familiar with, if you haven't already. As you can see, UI is based a little bit more on visuals, while UX is based more on functionality. So a lot of these are combined. That's why a lot of people are tended to be called UX/UI designers. But as you can see here, they're very different. Like UI focuses on color, graphic design, layouts, versus UX focuses on wireframes and information architecture. So UX designers are going to be focusing on functionality. UI is going to be visuals. You will see some intertwining though. There's definitely a fair amount of overlap, such as wireframing, prototyping, usability, and accessibility. And a reason why a lot of people get these confused is because they are so similar. It's important, though, that we understand these differences as well as while being potentially in the job hunt. So human resources, hiring managers, recruiters often still get confused between these two different fields. It's important to let them know what UX is versus UI. Although as UX throughout time becomes more defined and more mature, the more people are going to know the difference between these two fields. Now we're going to master the basics of visual and web design. We're going to be discussing color, grid systems, composition and balance, typography, and contrast. So there's some pretty broad color theories. So if you click on this link here, it's going to have a huge article for color theory for designers. It's going to go in much more detail, and I highly recommend you take a look at it either after this class. So you can see how each color emits a certain feeling. For instance, blue represents depth, stability, trust. Orange, enthusiasm, success, warmth. They're all pretty different. Although if we look at red, it has some pretty opposing feelings, such as passion, empower, determination, because red can also mean love or even violence. It really also depends what area you're from, because in China, red is the color of good luck and happiness. Another example is that in Thailand, purple is the color of mourning for widows, while for us, it means more royalty and luxury. It is best to know your audience and be aware of their cultural influences, so that way you can be aware how certain colors may emit a certain feeling for them. Here we can see how colors can complement one another along with basic rules to them. There are numerous concepts to think about during color theory, so I would suggest looking at this sheet as something to always look back on when deciding on a color theme. I included a link here, so hopefully it will be a bit less blurry. But knowing your complementary colors is extremely important, and I would definitely start here for the basics. We also must remember that hue, tint, tone, and shade are different versions of the same color. For example, if you see here, we are looking at the color pink. It's a little darker. But then we're going to add a little white to it. This is how it gets a little bit lighter. So that's going to be our tint. Now we're doing tone. So that's going to be hue plus white and black. So it's gotten a little bit more to the gray scale. Now shade is hue and black. So as you can see here, whenever you add black, all these colors are going to get drastically darker. This is going to be the one that you're going to notice the most difference in. We also have cool, warm, bright, dark, saturated, and desaturated colors as well. You can see some of these colors are placed in more than one category and color properties, such as red, which can be warm, bright, saturated, desaturated, or even dark. As we change the hue, tone, tint, and shade, these colors sometimes can transition into another color property. Now we have grid systems. These go way back in time. Think about a bookshelf or even a map. Those use grids, and so do UX designers. Now it's even more important because as more people are using numerous platforms such as computers, TVs, iPhones, we're going to need to build grids that are as versatile as possible for these reflexive platforms. Because a grid for an iPad will be vastly different than a grid for an iPhone, as the screens are completely different sizes. There's 4 main grid styles. I suggest clicking on this link here. It's going to dive into more detail. Here we're going to discuss manuscript grid, column grid, modular grid, and baseline grid. Here's an example of a manuscript grid. So a manuscript grid, or a single column grid, is the simplest grid structure. It's great for continuous blocks of text. If you look here, it is just you can type whatever you want in there and it stays organized in one distinct location for all your texts. Now we have column grid or multi-column grid. These are great for layouts that contain discontinuous information. You can fill these in with text, images, or you could do an image with the text description down below. Now we have modular grids. So modules are aligned not just by the eye estimate, but along the invisible straight lines here. The module itself is always going to be rectangle and its borders are either visible or indicated like this by background coloring, such as white. Or it could also be another image that's behind here in the background or a frame, such as you could outline this in black or purple, whatever color you want. It provides flexible formats for pages and allows you to create a complex hierarchy. For instance, you could put font right here and put a giant hero image up here. It really depends what you want people to pay attention to when you first get onto the screen, and how you organize it is totally up to you. Now we have the baseline grid. This ensures at the bottom of each line of text, its baseline aligns with the vertical spacing. It's great for typography and laying out elements. Look at the text lineup. We measure the bounding boxes, these right here, and make sure that the words themselves are on equal parts of the page. For instance, if you see here, this is 32 away, and this is also 32 away. This is making sure that this is all staying vertically in the same spot. Then we can check the text. So see how here, this is 39 away, 36, and 42. We want to make sure that it's user friendly and that it looks nice. It doesn't have to always be completely equal for this portion, but you do want to keep it in similar, in similar frames of reference. Look how much better this looks when you align it all. Now we're going to check out composition and balance. If you click here on this blue link, it's going to take you to another page and more details. For this, we're going to be looking at physical and visual balance, such as visual weight and visual direction. We're also going to be looking at 4 types of balance, being symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, radial balance, and mosaic balance. Lastly, we're going to be looking at 3 types of symmetry, being reflection symmetry, rotational symmetry, and translational symmetry. Here's physical and visual balance. So visual weight is perceived weight of a visual element. It's a measure of how much anything on the page attracts the eye of the viewer. Now we have visual direction. This is the perceived direction of a visual force. It's the direction in which we think an element should be moving if we're given a chance to move according to the forces acting on it. So in hindsight, an unbalanced composition can feel uncomfortable for the viewer. Look at the right image, these 2 people on a seesaw. It doesn't really look like they should be in balance, right? Because this person looks like they would weigh a lot more than this person. You would think that the smaller person would be a little bit further up in the air. It doesn't really make sense. Versus if we move the heavier person to the middle, this makes more sense to the viewer because the weight is more evenly distributed. So viewers will be more engaged with the visually aesthetically pleasing image that makes sense. So they're going to be looking at this and they're going to be more interested in it. Now we have symmetrical balance. This occurs when equal weights are on equal sides of composition. It evokes a feeling of formality and elegance, but sometimes can be seen as dry and boring. For instance, now we have the same 2 people of the same size and probably same weight on the seesaw. Then there's asymmetrical balance. It results from unequal visual weight on each side of the composition. It may contain one dominant element balanced by a few lesser focal points. These are often seen as more engaging and more modern, but can be pretty hard to attain. See how these images aren't really fully even, but they do look pretty aesthetically pleasing. For instance, this pink line looks a little bit shorter than the blue line, and this one has a car on this side. This one, we have a dog over here versus a cat, but it looks like they're balancing each other out. So it makes sense. It's hard to design like this, but it does give the viewer a nice feeling. Now we're going to look at radial balance. This occurs when elements radiate from a common center. For example, rays of sunlight and ripples in a pond after a stone is tossed, or even kaleidoscopes. Example, look at this kaleidoscope. We start in the middle, then we go out, and we see a repetitive pattern. This one, here's our focal point, and it just keeps going. It spreads and spreads and spreads, just kind of like when you're throwing a stone into a pond. Now we have mosaic balance. This kind of results from chaos, from balanced chaos. For example, let's look at Jackson Pollock's art. We don't really know exactly what's going on, and it can make you it does look pretty chaotic. There's no focal point. We don't know exactly where to look at first. But it looks clean at the same time. It's visually appeasing. Another example is here. There's no focal point. You can see that it almost looks like there might be some patterns, but they're not exactly there directly. It's still aesthetically pleasing. And it looks balanced. Now we have reflection symmetry. This occurs when everything is mirrored around a central axis, such as a snowflake or butterfly. Examples like this show that the reflection symmetry, as we often think, isn't going to be perfect on each side, and it might have slight variations. It's going to be pretty close to each other, but it's not going to be exactly the same on both sides. This is in differentiation of geometry, which often when you're doing math classes, you're going to be seeing reflection symmetry, but the shapes and sizes are often going to be exactly the same. But a good real-life example is taking a picture on a camera versus having a front-facing camera or somebody else taking a picture of you, or even looking at yourself in the mirror. You're going to see 2 different versions of yourself. You're going to look really similar, but not exactly the same. Rotational symmetry. This occurs when everything rotates around a common center. Some examples are wheels of a moving car, or petals growing on a sunflower. Let's look at this hexagon. In order to move the yellow dot, it has to be moved 6 times to make its full round of circle. Another example is, let's look at the rotational symmetry in the R. See how the R starts here, goes here, here, and here, to get all around to be the rotationally symmetrical. Translational symmetry occurs when elements are repeated over different locations in space. An example is a repeating fence. See how the houses are repeating, but they're on different lines and in slightly different spots. What about the birds? These ones look like they're angled a little bit differently. These ones are mirroring one another. But these ones, the birds aren't angled any differently and aren't facing any other direction. They're just in different locations. Typography. This is a huge part of UX design, and knowing this information will allow you to be a better designer. So here we have some free typography lessons. If you click on this, it'll take you to another link. And these lessons are pretty important. It's going to allow you to learn about font size, line height, different styles of typefaces, and things like typeface contrast and weight. You're going to learn how to choose and combine typefaces, and you're going to learn more about rhythm and modular scale. I know this seems a little like a little too much information to take in at once, but I promise you, through practice, you'll get there. Now we have contrast. So what does contrast do? It grabs attention. It helps you organize info, and it's going to create a focus. Here we have a link that's going to give you more in detail information about what contrast is. There's some important questions to think about when you're thinking about contrast in your designs. For instance, how are you creating contrast? Is it through texture, typography, color, shape? If you want to achieve contrast through typography, which fonts are you using? Are they different or just a little bit different? Be bold with your font choices, but remember to make sure the text is legible and that it stays in the same element of design. Last one, is contrast strengthening your design idea? So here's our UX design process. This is an extremely important aspect in becoming a UX UI designer. You really need to understand the process, methods, philosophy, and everything that's used in the UX design process. Generally speaking, the UX design process is very flexible. There's no strict rules or order of phases to follow. In addition to that, various companies, teams might have different methods of implementing their own design process. They all do generally look relatively similar though. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a general idea and a common UX design process called design thinking. Here you can see we're going to empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Empathize. The first stage of the design thinking is about getting to know the users, their wants, needs, and objectives. This includes observing and engaging with people, their experiences and motivations, as well as immersing yourself in the physical environment so you can gain a deeper understanding of the issues involved. All of the insights gathered at this stage are carried over the next stages. Here's a list of questions to ask while working on this stage. Do users need the product you're making? Do they want enough that they will either pay for it, or if it is free, spend time looking for it and learning to use it? Are you missing a key feature they'll need? Are you spending time building features they will never use? Define. This is the second stage in the design thinking process, and it's dedicated to defining the problem based on the information you've gathered during the empathize stage. During the define stage, you will analyze your observations and put them in order to define the key problems that you and your team have identified so far. Once you've created a problem statement, you can start to progress into the third stage of design thinking, ideate. So this is where we ideate. All of the insights from the previous stages have given you a very solid foundation in the terms of understanding your users. So it's time to generate potential solutions to the problem statement you've defined during the define stage. There are many different types of ideation techniques that will help you to generate potential solutions and ideas, such as brainstorming, mind mapping, and body storming. If based on previous stages we have decided what to build, we're gonna need to decide how. It is in the structure and skeleton phases where the application really takes shape. So you need to answer some critical implementation questions like, how should the content be organized so the users can easily find it? Will users find your app easy to use, or will they get confused and lost? What content is needed and how should it be written to be most engaging? The main goal of this stage is to generate as many potential solutions as possible when moving into the next design phase, and this will be prototyping. Prototyping. This is the fourth phase in the design thinking process, and it's all about experimentation and turning ideas into tangible products. A prototype is basically a scaled-down version of the product which incorporates the potential solutions identified in the previous stages. This step is key in putting each solution to the test and highlighting any constraints and flaws. Throughout the prototype stage, the proposed solutions may be accepted, improved, redesigned, or rejected, depending on how they fare in prototype form. In this stage, we need to focus on the surface of the product. What is the product going to look like visually? This is an important step because a user's first impression is critical. So try to find answers to the following questions. What should the visual tone of the product be? How do users feel when they see your product? Do they trust it? Is the product visually appealing and does it spark joy? Is the visual design usable and accessible? Last stage is testing. This is about validating the product before finally developing it. This is the final stage of the 5-stage mode. However, the results generated from the testing phase will often lead you back to a previous stage of the process, providing the insights you need to improve the current build of your product and test it over again. Design thinking is flexible in an iterative process. This means that the process doesn't have to follow the steps in a sequential order. The 5 stages should be understood as different modes that contribute to a product. Now we're going to learn how to design user interfaces and sharpen our visual design skills. We're going to get familiar with UX UI design patterns, copy top designers, and we're going to find out that details truly do matter. Having very strong visual UI design is a very valuable asset and a crucial step of becoming a UX UI designer, and probably the hardest discipline to perfect. It takes months and years of practice. You need to focus on visual UI design as the very big part of your skill set. You have to learn how to design user interfaces for different kinds of devices, including desktops, tablets, mobiles, etc. Every single day, you need to work, perfect, and sharpen your design skills. How are you going to do that? I pointed down below a few ideas and methods that you can use. First, this is how we're going to get familiar with UX UI patterns. Generally speaking, a UX UI design patterns are recurring solutions that solve common design problems you might encounter every day working as a UX UI designer. Design patterns are also known as standard reference points, guides, templates that designers might use to solve a particular problem when designing a website or mobile application. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you try to solve a particular design problem. Here's a list of some of the best places to find design patterns on the web. Take a click on any of these links and it'll take you to another page. Another thing we can do is copy top designers. There's nothing better than learning from the best and more experienced designers. Not everyone has a mentor or someone to help them in learning UX UI design. So I'd like to share with you a very effective method that will help you improve your visual skills on your own. How can you start? Go to Dribbble, Behance, Pinterest, or any other website where you might find good designs, and start copying top designers, but not blindly. Study them and be careful with close attention to detail. See what they do. See if you can mimic it. and see if you can make another version for yourself. This is where you're going to focus on layout, navigation, typography, icons, background, and so much more. You're going to try to understand how all of those small details are coming together. Copying and recreating others will give you that good taste. So you're going to have a better understanding and idea what good design looks like. But remember, this is all about practice. You're not actually selling any of this stuff. Details really, truly do matter, especially when it comes to UX, UI design. Sometimes even really small and subtle change might make a huge difference. So you need to start paying attention to every single detail of your designs. You need to be able to differentiate good from bad design. You also need to train your eye every single day. Go to Dribbble, Behance, and study very carefully top designers. How they use white space, typography, spacing, color combinations. Practice makes perfect. Now we're going to work on training projects. In order to improve your visual/UI design skills, you should start working on the fake concept projects. This is a great practice method which will help you build your portfolio, and it's going to help you get new clients or land a full-time job. In addition to that, working on fake projects is also great fun, as you get total freedom to play around with different design ideas, layouts, colors, typography, etc. So enjoy the learning process and have a great time doing it. Good visual UI design will draw attention to the people that you may eventually want to work with. Here are some great UX, UI related tools. We have Sketch, which is great if you're a Mac user. If you have Windows, Adobe XD is pretty flexible in all platforms. You can also use Framer, Figma, UXPen, and Envision app. These are all great tools, and I'd go ahead and check all these out if you can. So what have we learned in tonight's lesson? We learned about different types of grids, UX versus UI, color theory, balance, symmetry, and found out about numerous resources for becoming the best designer you can be. Our next session is going to be about website user experience checklist. Once again, here's a reminder, if you ever want private coaching, please reach out to me and I'll help you out. Just click on this link if so. Thank you so much for listening to my lecture. Once again, my name is Grayson Daub, and I hope you learned something new.